Greetings from Springfield, Massachusetts. The video you're about to watch is an interview with Michaelann Bewsee, a longtime radical activist and founding member of Arise for Social Justice, based here in Springfield. She's going to share with us her experiences, insights, and lessons about working for social justice. So, Michaelann, can you first give us a sense of your background and what kinds of things drew you into activism?
Well, I grew up in a working class family. My dad died young. My family fell into poverty. And I guess I thought of poverty as more voluntary initially, but really took on, the direction of my life. And I really wasn't much of a leader for many years, kind of a foot soldier in the movement, hung out in Cambridge during the anti-Vietnam War days and fighting for the ERA and just soaking it all up. So that started to lay some of my analysis of what was going on. But, it was also in Somerville and Cambridge a very class-driven, there was the working class folks from Somerville and the Harvard students, and there was a really clear difference between us. So I hung out with a lot of townies and just sort of moved on from there. And then I spent about 5 years homesteading in Maine, which was really good, and I learned lots of great skills, but came back to Springfield pregnant and poor, and it was like, now what?
So when did you become active yourself in social justice work?
Well, I got recruited by somebody in the Communist Labor Party out of the Hampden County Peace Coalition, so I was working on anti-nuclear projects. And they were pretty useless, but I did get a good understanding of some larger economic issues that I just hadn't gotten before. But probably the pivotal point for me was when my mom, and I was on public assistance, I was on welfare at that point, and the governor was fighting with the legislature over budget approval. So that meant that people on public assistance weren't getting their welfare checks. And then my mom got turned down for fuel assistance because her annual income with my brother and sister working little part-time jobs was $11 too high. So that's when, everything just kind of came together. I remember sitting down at a desk where I was doing community service and writing this poem and then saying, okay, and then I went back to the party folks and said, are we going to do anything or not? And they were like, well, we can't really be out, people know we're in the party, then we'll lose our credibility. And I'm like, then what good are you? And I called up an organization in Boston, doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, Coalition for Basic Human Needs. And they were doing statewide welfare rights organizing, and they were part of the national welfare rights movement. And I said, okay, so what can you do for us out here? And they were like, well, not a lot, but there are 4 or 5 women that have called us from your neck of the woods, and we could share their phone numbers. So I called them all up, and we had our first meeting and, tried to develop what we needed right then and there to move forward. And, I had no idea where we'd wind up. But, that was the core of us, 5 or 6 women meeting together and talking about our experiences being poor.
So your experiences with poverty and then also the period during the Vietnam War were pretty pivotal.
Yeah, it takes time to build a sort of a structural analysis. And I remember when we first got together and we were looking into some of the issues about why are we so poor, you know, and at that time the welfare rolls were really high, and it was just when Reagan was getting his welfare, his Cadillac mom jargon together, and then Clinton came along with welfare reform. So, you know, we were trying to understand all of how this worked together. And one of the things that we found out was that what we received in welfare benefits was 42% below the federal poverty level. And then I'm like, oh, you know, another light bulb moment. So when you grow up poor, you tend to blame yourself for your poverty. And in fact, that's even been a trend throughout Arise that I've had to deal with as I want to ask people for money to support our work. But as a poor person, I have a great reservation about ever really kind of saying I'm in need, you know. So I had to struggle to overcome that. But knowing 42% below the poverty level, then I could say things like, so it's not because I got my daughter that comic book that I'm out of money at the end of the month. You know, that's not what it's all about. You know, that's built into the system. And so we started, you know, thinking about those things and looking that it wasn't us. You know, I mean, honestly, poor people were set to make a lot of mistakes. If you don't have money, you don't ever learn how to use it well. So, you know, that's just a reality that we've had to live with. But, you know, it's looking at the structural issues that really started moving us in the right direction and away from blaming ourselves all the time for our poverty.
So you were one of the founding members of a grassroots social justice organization, Arise for Social Justice, which has been around since 1985. Can you reflect on one or two of the more significant campaigns you worked on during those years?
Sure. One was to get a cost of living increase in welfare benefits. And that was an uphill battle. But at the time, there was a women's statewide legislative caucus. And they don't exist anymore either. But it was an effort to recognize this statewide. So we organized with them and some other fledgling groups. You know, the funny thing is when we got started, those first 4 or 5 years, there were a number of groups like Arise in the state. Sisters Together Ending Poverty in Framingham, and a Worcester group and some Cambridge groups, and they're all gone. It just kills me, you know, but they're all gone. But at that time, we were able to network with those groups, and we did get three consecutive years of small cost of living increases. I think it brought us up to 27% below the poverty level. Now it's fallen back again to 40. But so that was very exciting to actually see that we could have an impact on statewide legislation. But then again, around the same time, one of our members came in and said, do you know there are families living in the motel right next door to you that are homeless, that have been placed there by welfare because the shelters are full? And we're like, no, we didn't know that. So we started offering like 1 meal a week to families to come over, and, you know, we helped them organize to get a laundry room in the motel. And, you know, that's when we really started, again, this systemic look at how much poverty destabilizes families. And, you know, that recognition that probably most families with incomes under certain levels are going to be homeless in a 4 or 5 year period. And so, you know, we started recognizing this, and that became a big part of our organizing. You know, and we've made some progress, but poverty keeps going up, and more people are affected, and there's not enough housing for people. But those were a couple of the big things that we worked on. And then not too long after that, we really started becoming aware of how people of color were much more deeply affected than the average white person. I mean, so we're a class-based organization, but, you know, it was clear it became time to really look more deeply at other ways that people with disabilities, gay people, people of color, were affected by systemic poverty. So started trying to we're still working on it, still an effort, forever. You know, but that changed a lot of our direction too, brought in criminal justice work.
Why do you think that particular campaign were successful? Was it any particular way that you were doing it?
We did a lot of actions. We had to call public attention to these issues, and I got to tell you, there were some painful moments to hear how people thought about us. You know, and I mean, that still exists, but I think my skin is tougher. You know, but painful moments to see how much victim blaming there was. And, you know, it's a different economic time. Well, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. Why can't you do the same thing? You know, well, you got to have boots. You got to have straps to pull it off. So we did a lot of public education, a lot of public speaking, going to different presentations, and we were new, so we got some media attention about it. And, you know, I think we did break down some of those barriers, and then of course through the years, more and more, you know, the middle class disappears, people are struggling harder. We seem to be in a halfway decent phase right now if you don't look too deeply. You know, it's all shaky house of cards right now with supposedly a good economy, but we were just out on the street, you know, and we took some risks, and we still do. I remember one of the things that happened fairly early on was the Latin Kings came to us, and they said, we want to go back to our roots. We don't want to be who we are right now. Will you work with us? Will you share with us? Share your office? And, you know, we had a lot of discussion about it, and we decided we were going to do it. And from that moment on, we were under the most massive police surveillance. There was a car parked outside in, you know, in the parking lot of the funeral home next door every single minute. But we marched together. It didn't work out. You know, the pull of the old ways was not strong enough to, and there was a lot of misogyny in the way, you know, and then there were a couple instances of like guys shaking their women, and, you know, we said, you know what, guys, I just don't think the time is right. I think we have to separate. And then people told us, oh no, you can't do that. You'll be victims of retaliation. The Latin Kings will never let you break this bond. But you know what? We were always up front with them. They were up front with us. And it ended very peaceably, you know, so, but that certainly got us to the attention of the police department, and that sort of never changed. We've been raided through the years. We've had other things happen, but that's okay. So another campaign that was really important to us and taught me a lot was when we started a sanctuary city for homeless people. And it put us right in the face of the city and the city's policies. And some people thought we did it because it was a poor protest. We just wanted to call attention to the issue. But no, we had a real need to meet. There was a pretty radical guy, Kevin Noonan, have to give him a shout out, who is the director of Open Pantry Community Services. And he had done hunger strikes for homeless people. He was a close ally. And he was running a small shelter that we were involved in starting, calling the Warming Place. And every night we'd gather up guys and we'd take them to a different church. And the church would let them stay overnight, and Open Pantry would provide staff. And then we had volunteer staff. And then it got too many to fit in a church, so Kevin found some sites, but the city was always pushing him around. Oh, this site isn't adequate, and you don't have proper toilet facilities, and it went on and on. So finally, the city, which had been providing some money, defunded the Warming Place. And there was only the Worthington Street shelter and the rescue mission at the time, and they were being very poorly run, and they were completely inadequate to meet people's needs. So it ended on Mother's Day. I remember it was a cold, rainy Mother's Day too, and we didn't see folks the first day, but the second day we had built a lot of relationships with people in the Warming Place because of working there and being a part of that program. So the second day, people started coming up to Arise. We had an office on Rifle Street at the time, and they were like, I slept on a park bench last night. I don't know what I'm going to do tonight. What can we do? So, we're all sitting around trying to think, what can we do? What can we do? And it was one of those ideas everybody would like to claim, but nobody really knows now who thought of it first, that, well, gee, aren't churches supposed to provide you a sanctuary? But we knew if we asked, they wouldn't. So what we did about, those of us who are staff, volunteers, members, we went home, we gathered up our tents from camping trips and put out the call for blankets, and then about 6 o'clock at night, we snuck down to the lawn of St. Michael's Cathedral on State Street, very visible place, and set up our tents, and people moved in. And I think we had 7 tents the first night, 15 the next night, and then it just grew and grew until we took over the whole lawn, set up a kitchen, which the city did eventually shut down. So then we had to get volunteers to bring in food that was cooked elsewhere. We kept it going for 6 months, and until Election Day. And by then it was pretty cold. It was a struggle, for people to want to stay in tents through the winter. But it was an amazing community. We didn't really run it. We provided tools. We provided examples, material goods. We encouraged self-government so that the people who lived in the tent city were the ones who were the spokespeople who just, they'd have meetings every night. Oh, well, so-and-so, he's got to calm down. He's making too much noise in the middle of it. It was great. I'm not saying it was perfect, but it was an example of what people can do together. So finally, when it got really, really cold, and we'd been working on the city all this time to do something better. The director of Worthington Street Shelter got arrested. There were some huge scandals hitting the city at the time for corruption. And so the city took over running Friends of the Homeless Shelter and started expanding bed capacity. I will say another interesting thing that happened during that tent city period was it was not just the people who had been displaced from the Warming Place who came in, but people who'd been living in tents in the woods, that wanted to be in a community. And they came too, and I still see lots of people. Most people have moved ahead. Some people are dead. Some people have fallen backwards. but most people really were able to use that experience to get a sense of their own power. So that was an important time for us. And it was great to be in the face of the city and saying, you can fix this. What are you going to do? We can't keep this going. What are you going to do?
Thinking about the different campaigns you've worked on, what kinds of strategies do you think were most effective and successful?
Well, definitely being public, being out there, speaking our truth, encouraging people to speak out. I gotta say though that there's one lesson we've learned that I guess it's just the way it is, and we've been successful with it, but it's also painful, and that is the campaigns that we've gotten the most support for are ones that improve the quality of life for everyone in Springfield, not just poor people. Those are the campaigns that, you know, have really been successful in building a base. Now, we're happy with that, you know, poor people are obviously the most affected, so we want them to benefit also, but that's where we get the broad community support when we do get it, and we've been able to make a couple big systemic changes on that basis. I can tell you one of them. Okay, that's the change from an at-large city council and school committee system to a mix of at-large and ward representation. Because what would happen was all the decisions that were being made on city council were being made basically by 9 white guys who almost all lived in the most affluent sections of the city, and if they could avoid even driving through the inner city neighborhoods, they would. And this white kid came to us, and he had tried to file a lawsuit charging racial discrimination on the way the system was running, but he didn't have standing because he was a white kid. So, you know, he couldn't prove that he himself was experiencing discrimination because of the system, although in many ways he was. It's, you know, white people were not well advantaged by the system either. There were white working class sections of the city, and, you know, any white person who is living in a structurally racist community is disadvantaged in ways that we don't even understand. So, so he came to us because we are multiracial, and we started meeting with people. It was a long, long campaign, probably the longest that we've had so far. You know, there were a lot of white people afraid that if we had ward representation, that people of color would start telling them what to do. But, you know, or it would have some negative impact on the city. But I don't think it's worked out that way at all. It was basically a 12-year campaign, you know, and we had our low points. We did federal lawsuits. We were lied to by city council. They put it on the ballot as a non-binding question and said, if we get even one vote in the majority, we'll pass a law that gives ward representation. So, of course, I think we got, it wasn't really high the first time around, 52% majority. And they immediately broke their promise. So then it went through another hiatus, and then we went back in. And eventually, when we got it on the ballot the second time, it won 74% of the vote citywide. So by that time, even white communities were recognizing that they too could benefit from having a direct representative. So now we have 5 at large. We wanted it to only be 3, but that was the compromise. 5 at large and 1 from each ward in the city. So city council and school committee now look like our community. And one of the ways this has played out is at the last city council meeting, city council passed an ordinance designating Springfield as a welcoming community, which is a little bit more palatable way of saying sanctuary city. That calls for no cooperation with ICE and says that the police, if they have to stop someone or respond to a domestic violence call, can't bring up the issue of whether or not the people involved are documented. So the mayor says he's going to veto it, and the city council says we've got enough votes to override it. That never could have happened before ward representation. But it took everybody understanding it was a benefit to them. I actually think we've got a lot of work to do in the next few years to go back and dig in more to, the original sense of our issues about systemic poverty and help the community at large understand how we all pay a price. It's actually in our mission statement. So the first thing is educate, organize, and empower low-income people to fight for our rights, to know what our rights are and to fight for them. And the second thing in the mission statement is to educate the community at large as to its common interest in social justice for poor people. And I think we're going to have to spend a little more time on that this year. Sometimes we can be very project and campaign focused, and we need to step back and keep looking at that big picture, especially now.
So when you say public, being out there, speaking the truth, and improving the quality for everyone, could you say something more about how?
Sure. We do a lot of door knocking, passing out flyers, developing literature that is accessible to people, getting it in every public space we can think of. It's time to get back to the churches and religious organizations and get them more involved in helping them to fulfill their mission. But it's the person to person. We have a lot of foot traffic at Arise because we're now known as sort of like the place of last resort. If you're denied your rights or you're not sure what your rights are, you can come to Arise, and there are people there who will help you, everything from, filling out a food stamp application to negotiating with a landlord or challenging an agency that's denying people's rights. But always we're like, oh, do you know you're the fourth or fifth person this week who's come in here with this issue? What do you think's going on? Pushing people to, build their own context, their own political analysis, and take that back out into the community too. So the more of that we do, the better off we are. And the better off the community is. But it's the people. We can't... I say that we have to educate some of the working and middle class also, and I know historically that a lot of successful movements have come from when those gaps are closed and people are working together, but they got to take some responsibility for educating themselves. Our responsibility is to work with our peers, to work with other poor people, because it starts at the bottom. I really believe that.
So do you think kind of face-to-face contact is much better than, the kind of Facebook stuff and online petitions that people are doing?
I definitely think there's a role for social media. Online petitions, I don't really bother with. But, we have a Facebook group and a page, and our members post things. Like, sometimes they're local, sometimes they're bigger picture things that help with analysis or incidents of police discrimination in other places. And it's like a little town newspaper. So I'm very pleased with with our Facebook group and the kind of interactions, and sometimes it comes in really handy. I can put out, hey, we need food. You know, we're sending families to motels. We're trying to feed them when they come into the office. Can people please bring us food? You know, easy to serve stuff. And they do. And it's easier to get that out via social media than face-to-face. But face-to-face is really important. You know, it always will be. It's where things really matter, when you can look into somebody's eyes and see where they're coming from and make that human connection.
So one of the criticisms of some social justice organizations is that the activists are mostly middle class, college educated. So based on your experience, how do you mobilize people who are most directly affected by poverty and make sure that they're at the forefront of the struggle?
Well, that's not true for Arise. In fact, now that we have a new ED, I think in 30 years she and one other woman are the first people we've ever hired from outside the organization. All of our staff has moved up from being on a committee, maybe an intern. Like Joni was an intern with us for 2 semesters, but before that, and I didn't even know this because I wasn't on that committee, she was working with the Criminal Justice Committee on a case of police brutality that, you know, was really terrible, the Melvin Jones case. So she was connected, and then when she had to do a social work intern, she thought of us, and she developed this expertise in assisting homeless families. And when we had, you know, a little bit of money, and, you know, there up until about 4 years ago, there were times when I would have to say to people, I'm sorry, there's not enough money to pay everybody. We're going to only have to get half our salary, and then the next time a grant comes in, you know, then we can make it up. So that hasn't happened for about 4 years, thank God. But Joni came in at a period when we said, oh, okay, I think we can do this. And now she's staff. So she does have a college education. I don't. Liz, our housing organizer, doesn't. I think Ellen went to college, but she came in through the Peace Committee. You know, working, I met her when we were doing solidarity work with Central America. And she helped another organization that no longer exists, New England Central America Network, organize delegations. So maybe 8 of us went to Nicaragua over a couple-year period and met with the organizers there and the radicals. And it was just after Daniel Ortega lost the election the first time, and people were like, what next? And so we had great discussions there, but that's where Ellen came from. You know, so that's how we develop our leaders from our members. And I think it's worked out pretty well for us. Otherwise, yeah, there's some legitimacy to that criticism about grassroots organizations. But I think that's changing too. You know, I'm seeing a shift.
So how is it possible, from your experience, to shift that? What is important in order to shift so that the affected people themselves are at the forefront of the struggle?
Well, I think part of it is recognizing when a strategy or an organization is effective. I mean, you can have a white college-educated crowd leading an environmental justice organization, but if they're never developing what it is that really help people understand the impact of climate change. You know, if those people look around, they say, well, how do we get our say? How do we get, you know? So there's some gradual shifts in strategies. I know an organization that we work pretty closely with Toxics Action Center is really engaged in this process, trying to look at how to be more effective. But there is still this tendency, especially among environmental groups, to not know how to move an issue from the academic perspective to the impact on real people's lives. And they better get it together, because we don't have a whole lot of time to get on top of this. So, and I've been very critical of, one of the coalitions of environmental justice groups in Boston, when they put out a job application, they want to know people's SAT scores. It's like, what the fuck difference does that make? You got a good how are you going to identify a potential leader by looking at their SAT scores? And so, they're, it's self-selecting to, white college-educated applicants. And you just got to challenge that directly if you want to make a difference. So I am seeing a shift, but it's not happening as quickly as it needs to. And, it's not, poverty issues are not like the sexy issue right now. Nobody talks about it. I remember when Bill Clinton got elected, there'd been so much in the media, TV, movies. Boy, you think you got a homeless movie made, TV movie made about homeless people, you got it made. And there were some brilliant movies then. There was a movie about Mitch Snyder, who is definitely one of my heroes, who, got the first shelter open in DC. So there was a movie about his life. So I happened to be sitting in the PIP shelter for single homeless people the day that Bill Clinton was inaugurated and gave his speech. And we were sure. So we were all sitting there, we were all glued to the TV. It was just after lunch, and we were all glued to the TV. And he went on and on and on and never talked about poverty or homelessness. And I look around the room and I see people going like from this to. I thought, okay, we're not done yet. So, and even now, those are not the issues. Now, nobody wants to look at it. There's a huge media blitz, huge, we have a lot up against us in the Congress, and people talk about working poor people. Oh, the working people. Well, we want to be the working people too, or we are the working people, or whatever. But no, how about poor people? We're still hidden. We're still hidden, and there are more and more of us all the time. So that's just like a huge challenge. I didn't mean to lose my train of thought there, but that's what we're up against. That's what we're up against all the time, and we have as much work to do now as we ever did.
Do you think that the key for Arise is what you mentioned, to recruit from within? That's the explanation why Arise is having affected people at the forefront?
Yeah, and something we haven't done in a couple of years, and one of the things I'm really looking forward to being able to restart this year is our free schools and popular education. Because to me, popular education is the way that people learn. And we do that, on a one-on-one basis to the degree that we can, but there's nothing like sitting down at a table, with a loosely structured topic. When we were doing the free schools before, we had, we'd run in 2 6-week series. And the first was around anti-oppression and political education issues. Then we take a break, and then the second series would be around the issues and the way they affect us now, and they lead into organizing. So I'm so excited about doing that again. And you know, the facilitators would really loosely structure a direction for the conversation, but where everybody's a learner and everybody's a teacher. That's been the most consistent, effective strategies for Arise.
So one of the things to encourage poor people to be more politically involved, or give them the opportunity to be more politically involved, is to provide food at meetings or daycare, have a kind of child welcome space. How important do you think that's been?
I think it's been very important. You know, we're just organizing around a meeting tonight, and I heard Charlotte, our senior aide, say on the phone, "Oh, you can't come because you've got 2 kids. Bring the kids." You know, so we'll make it work. You know, if it's a little disruptive, a little noisy. We are also, I think, getting ready finally to move to a slightly larger place, which will be helpful. But there's also a challenge involved here. And I want to make sure we're all on the same page as we move forward. As we become the place where people can come to when they can't go anywhere else, there's a little tendency to start seeing us as service providers. Now, that's a bad thing. Don't want it to happen. And it's really up to staff and core members and our board to keep us in that direction. It's why we don't take state or federal money, because of the paperwork, the commodification of people, turning them into numbers, file numbers, caseloads, blah, 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 blah. No, that's not it. But when somebody walks in our door, you know, we'll say to them, "Well, how did you get here?" "Well, so-and-so told me that you might be able to put me up in a motel tonight, or that I could get some food here." So that's okay. You know, however people come to us, that's okay. But it is not okay if the staff and members developed a mentality that we are primarily here to serve people, not organize people. And I've seen a lot of organizations go in that direction, and they've done it with good justification. I'll give you an example. One of the jobs I had before Arise, or just as Arise was coming into existence, was working for an organization called HERA, the Hotline to End Rape and Abuse. And it was started by women who had experienced domestic violence, incest, sexual assault. They started their own house and ran it with volunteers where women could be safe. But it wasn't sustainable financially, so eventually they decided they would take some money from the Department of Public Health. And it worked out okay for some years. But then the Y came along, and they decided they were going to start their own program, the ARCH program. And now they're quite monolithic. You know, they have lots of services for battered women. So about 5 years after I was involved there, the Department of Public Health said, "We feel we'd be better off consolidating services. So you have to become a part of the Y." And the organization chose not to go in that direction. And I think it was a wise choice. But the grassroots movement that brought those services into the community was started by people who are directly affected. So, you know, we've only done one development project in all our years, and I thought it would kill me. It took 10 years, no, maybe 8 years, to buy an old residential hotel and transform it into efficiency apartments for homeless people. And we ran it for 10 years. Well, we had a separate board of directors. But eventually, and this is just part of the way things go, the people that were our funders on the state said, well, yeah, we funded you 10, 15 years ago, but we would never fund a board of directors like this again. If you want refinancing, if you want a new roof, if you want to make sure the boiler is strong, you're going to have to sell. And it was very painful, but it was also, the time is right, and we did. Wayfinders, formerly HAP, is now the owner of the Rainville. But it was, I learned more about development than I ever wanted to know. And I would definitely encourage grassroots development groups. We started a community land trust. It spun off, it hasn't done well. Now we're trying to figure out if we can pick it back up and put more resources in it, you know, for people to actually control their own housing. But we'll see how that goes. Hope there's enough hours in the week to make it happen.
But so providing services, if you start to do that too much, you would say people kind of lose sight of the political goals? Is that...
There's definitely that tendency, and that's on us to make sure that doesn't happen. You know, that's on us to always prioritize political education, the bigger context. I mean, it's hard when you're really struggling and fighting with big systems like DCF, and they come and take your kids, and you know, and then what they want to get your kids back is, you know, if your kids are in foster care, those foster parents get so much financial support, and then if a family is able to get their kids back, all of a sudden it's like, okay, you're in it on your own. You got to go take parenting classes. You have to pay for them. Your kid's got a doctor's appointment. They better go. They better go, or we're going to come and take your kids back. But we're not giving you any transportation money. And we got a little thing going with your doctor, so we know, you know, your doctor's a mandated reporter. We actually tell families, don't take your kids to the emergency room unless they're bleeding out or have a clearly broken bone. Always go through your primary care, because those ER docs, they are fast with reporting cases of neglect and abuse. So now we've had a good group before, and we're just starting it up in January again, of families that are DCF involved, so they can share experiences, what's worked, what hasn't worked. But we also have a member who works for DCF, and she says the whole system is broken from beginning to end. So this group also has to make political challenges and bring awareness to how dysfunctional the child protective system is. And I'm very excited about seeing that work take place again in Arise. So, all right, I'll just repeat a little of when Reagan was doing his 1,000 points of light thing and thinking that all our needs could be met by volunteer efforts and community engagement. And there were big debates about how much we had a right to expect from a government that supposedly we elect and pay for, and how much we had to meet our own needs. So in the 70s, there was a big movement around meeting our own needs. There were women's health collectives that formed. I was sorry to hear recently that Our Bodies Ourselves is going to stop producing its volume that, I mean, and the health clinics that were run by women are closing. I flipped pancakes for the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program. And just mostly was in the back, but watching what happens when you create an environment where people can get a physical need met, but also share analysis. So I think now is actually a good time to be moving back towards that direction, because there may not be enough to create real systemic change in the sense of a network of food co-ops or a network of community land trusts. I'm not sure that we would ever, or for many, many years, be able to shift to that kind of economy. But what they do is show people what can be done. And that's where the real value in trying to meet some of your own needs is, to show that it's possible. A better world is possible, as they say.
What do you see as the biggest challenges to creating a mass movement for social justice?
This is a really tough question. And it's not good for me to be too much in the vanguard. I'm going to be honest, that's not the way movements really develop. But we are in big trouble on this planet. Big, big trouble. And I have always believed, it's why I do this work, that you just keep doing what you're doing and eventually justice will prevail. Whether it's like the more well-known and kind of cornier statements, Martin Luther King, the arc of justice bends slowly, but it does bend. I mean, that's where I've always come from. Now I'm more like, oh God, who is it? Gramsci, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Because we are in trouble. The climate change is outpacing our efforts to do grassroots organizing to continue that bend to justice, and it's just not something that's very high on people's radar. We're working on it. At Arise, we've felt the best way to make that connection is through public health. So we say, hey, do your kids have asthma? Do you know about air quality? Do you know they want to build a biomass plant? Do you know how polluting it will be? But even taking that link and saying, do you know our soil is blowing away? Do you know we're creating crescents in this world where people will no longer be able to live? Do you know we have environmental refugees and migrants all over the world, and even here in this country, but we're not seeing it. I don't know how to close that gap, and I'm scared. I am really scared that, in the latest report says, well, of course it's too late to stop climate change. It's already happening. We've got about 12 years if we want to still be able to have a planet that most people can live on. So I don't know. I'm thinking hard about this. There's not much national work that can be done. There's some great work being done internationally, and I think that we need to know more about that, and we can use that to inspire our local communities. There's some great work being done by indigenous communities in this country, and we need better connections with them. But our real work, it's got to be local and state, and hope that we can do the best that we can to buy ourselves some time so that we can achieve social justice economically. But right now, I'm scared. It's maybe a little more negative than you would like to hear, but it's the reality I think we're facing. And not many people know about it to really own it. And like I said, you can't be in the vanguard too much. Got to find ways to always cycle it back, get people to understand what's going on. How we're going to build a mass movement, I'm not sure. I'm learning. I'm thinking a lot about this all the time. But it's sort of a new area, and I need to go hang out with other people who are thinking about the same things and do some brainstorming. And Arise, I'm probably the person who understands this the best. So yes, I want to bring other people in Arise up to speed, but I need to find some peers to really discuss this with so we can come up with the best strategies. But in the best possible world, this is our opportunity to transform the economy, you know, to transform the world to a more just place that people can, so the opportunity is there. Do we have time to achieve it? I don't know. But the positives that come out, that could come out of embracing clean energy and an economy that is not profit-driven or doesn't place profit above people all the time, is tremendous. So the opportunities are really terrific. And this is when I go back even to my years homesteading in Maine and knowing how healing it is to understand the role of a bug in the earth and what it does, and that it has a place, and it's not some nuisance to, you know, to see a forest, to know that people are happier when they live on a street with trees than when they don't live on a street with trees. You know, to know that everything we need to heal ourselves is all around us, economically, physically, spiritually, and we've been cut off from it. So how do we get back there? You know, I do have hope. I do have hope.
Many young people today care a lot about social justice and want to see radical changes, but they're not sure how to be effective. So what's your advice to the younger generation of activists?
Start with what's around you. Look at what you see affecting your people in your community right where you are, and build from there. So, for example, I'm very supportive of movements on college campuses to get their universities to divest from fossil fuel, to do, you know, to have sustainable ways to run their institutions. But then you got to realize that's just, you know, a drop in the bucket, and you have to keep building that analysis. Get with the people. I had a chance to say this at City Council the other night. They gave me a nice little proclamation, and now I think they hope I'll go away, but I'm not going away, you know. So, but I had a chance to say to City Council, now let me tell you what I want. I want you to go be with the people, not just at election time. And this is what I would say to young people. Listen, learn, find a place to connect, build an analysis together, and take action, and don't be afraid. Or maybe I should say, be afraid and do it anyway. You know, but yeah, listen, don't get all your learning out of books. Go talk to people and see how the real world works. And don't give up.
Do you see any model, hopeful model of how some group or community is doing it in a way that you find inspiring in terms of social justice work?
I think we've been a little too insular recently. You know, we've been focused on some big, important local campaigns like getting a climate change plan in Springfield, and, you know, all of that has been good. But if there's a model, it's Standing Rock. It's where you are grounded in the earth, you put your life on the line, and you work to change the regulations, to change the way business is done in this country. I'm sure there are other groups there, and we have to go find them, because it's a challenge not to just see things the same old way, and I think we need that dose of inspiration right now. I could certainly use it, and my best hope has been from what I watch Indigenous people do, not just in this country, but in other countries. That's real. That's real. And people pay for it with their lives. There are environmental activists, dozens murdered every year for standing up for the right way to do things. And I'm going to get choked up here a little. No, I'm not. Okay. No, that's what, to me, is how deeply rooted the movements in this country have to be. And, I see too many groups, they don't want anybody to be mad at them. Well, we built a relationship here, let's not burn that bridge, let's stay on the right side of the issue and maybe not call them out on this because we might need them for that. No, that's the road to hell. That's the road to hell. So the groups I admire are the groups that don't do that. But we need to connect with each other more than we have. Okay, I have 2 daughters. They're 10 years apart. They hated Arise. They hated Arise. They hated me going to meetings. They hated my dragging them out, late at night, 9:30, 10 o'clock meetings. Eventually, they stopped going to those meetings. I'm like, we're staying home, Mom. And that's where the value of the collective household came in handy, because there were people to watch my kids. Then they, for years I would hear, Mom, you're giving too much time to Arise. And, eventually they grew up, became adults, got married, settled their own affairs. So one of my daughters does closed captioning for the hearing impaired, which is, a really giving profession, and has just started working to save some of the trees in Worcester that are being attacked by beetles, and making sure there's replacement. My other daughter does community acupuncture, which is, a way of providing acupuncture at very low rates. So it's not at all exclusive. It's open to the community, and she's become quite an activist. And my granddaughter, my oldest granddaughter, is studying ethnomusicology and spends a lot of time in Brazil, and is learning, how to build bridges. And I think she's writing her master's on why white people are so intolerant of loud music from the Puerto Rican community or from Brazil or whatever. I'm so proud of all of them. And now they appreciate Arise. And now they appreciate what they got out of the ongoing relationship. And they have all found a way to be activists in their own right. And I'm very proud of them. And I'm glad they've forgiven me for all those late night meetings and being dragged out and years of poverty. They got something good out of it after all.
Thank you, Michaelann Bewsee, for these fantastic reflections on your work in Springfield, on activism, and your work with Arise for Social Justice.